Take a network break. I'm Drew Conry Murray.
I'm Jonna Johnson.
We've got a very full show today, so you may want to grab an extra virtual donut or two as we walk through the valley of the shadow of AI. Jonna, what's on tap?
Well, we'll be discussing some announcements from the HPE and Pure Storage conferences, some AI chip news from Korea, that is the country, and AMD, that is the company, and we'll talk about the impact of AI on workforces and a whole bunch more.
All right. And stick around after the news. We have a sponsored Tech Bytes conversation where we'll get a preview of HPE Discover and the networking security and agentic AI announcements coming out of the event. We'll also talk about how HPE is converging network and security in its product portfolio and how HPE is delivering new AI capabilities to customers. We're also going to talk about that in the news today. But first, our weekly Red Alert, Jonna.
Okay, and this weekly Red Alert is, unlike most of our Red Alerts, 10 years old.
Oh.
This is CVE 2025-49113. This remote code execution vulnerability has been present in Roundcube for over 10 years. The disclosure of it was accelerated due to the vulnerability's rapid exploitation just 48 hours after a patch appeared on GitHub, with attackers already weaponizing and selling the exploit, which is why these things are so difficult. You talk about the fix and everybody jumps on, that wonderful window of opportunity in between the time the fix is available and draws attention to the exploit, to the vulnerability, and begins attacking. This affects over 53 million hosts. The flaw is in the widely deployed Roundcube webmail client, which poses a severe risk across shared hosting providers, control panels, and major institutions worldwide, including leading universities and government bodies, making immediate transparency vital for defenders. So basically, if you haven't patched it, do it right now. And that is in the broader context of over the past week, approximately 921 new CVE entries were published, and 3 had a CVSS score of over 9, which basically means, Drew, it was a slow week.
I know, honestly, only 3 with over 9. That is a slow week.
Exactly.
Yes. And 10-year-old vulnerability is coming to light. You never know what's going to be around the corner. All right, let's get into some news. First, HPE announced new products at its HPE Discover event. One that caught my eye is GreenLake Intelligence. GreenLake Intelligence is an agentic AI framework. It will deploy AI agents across the HPE portfolio, including network, compute, and storage. I think our audience is probably going to be mostly interested in GreenLake Intelligence being incorporated into Aruba Central, which already runs on GreenLake. David Hughes, Chief Product Officer for HPE Aruba Networking, walked through an example on a pre-briefing that I attended. Essentially, the way it works is there is an autonomous supervisory AI model that talks to a bunch of sub-agents. These sub-agents are all specialized. For instance, some track real-time network data, some track topology, some are trained on Aruba documentation, some are trained on Aruba support and TAC, etc. So if a problem is detected, the supervisory AI coordinates with all the relevant agents to gather and analyze data, identify a root cause, and then propose a recommendation. It presents this information to a human admin through a co-pilot interface. Once the human admin reviews everything, the admin can either have the fix pushed automatically or schedule it in a change window. And just for folks who've been paying attention to the development of agentic AI, HPE is using the Model Context Protocol. This is one of the early protocols that's emerging as a front runner for AI agent interaction, and HPE is attaching itself to it. So that's the big news from HPE. Johnny, they weren't the only ones with a conference this week.
No, they sure were not. And at the Pure Accelerate 2025 conference, Pure Storage unveiled its Enterprise Data Cloud EDC platform and refreshed its FlashArray and FlashBlade hardware lines to offer greater performance and broader workload support. EDC is powered by Pure Fusion, which automates storage provisioning and management across on-prem and cloud deployments, aiming to bring a cloud-like experience directly into enterprise data centers, that mythical private cloud. Analysts have been saying this is a strategic evolution beyond hardware into infrastructural-wide data management for Pure Storage, although it currently lacks some of the deeper integration features of competitors like NetApp. Alongside the software, Pure introduced new hardware with significant performance gains and support for object storage, and claims that it is completely committed to an all-flash infrastructure while also acknowledging growing demand for object-based storage. So I think the first 2 announcements really have to do with overarching management frameworks in the big picture of things.
Yeah, I think so. And we're going to hear more about agentic AI over the coming months, the coming years, as all the tech vendors glom onto the latest instantiation of AI being delivered to their customers. Moving on.
Speaking of which,
Yeah,
yeah.
Juniper Networks has announced new AI ops capabilities in its data center assurance platform. Data center assurance is a suite of cloud-hosted AI-powered services for network operations. There are 3 new features which fall under the category of predictive insights, and the goal of predictive insights is to alert operators to problems before they actually disrupt operations. The first feature is system health. It monitors the physical devices in your data center and can warn you, for example, if a switch is going to fail because of processor or memory problems. Second is capacity. It alerts you if a fabric expansion is necessary because of traffic growth. And the third is optics, which warns you if an optical module is about to fail. And that's always something you want to know about before it goes bad. The System Health app is available now. Capacity and optics are going to be available in Q3 2025. Juniper also says it's expanded its integration with VMware vCenter so that alarms from vCenter, including information about applications running in VMs, are added to Apstra's graph database of the data center network. Juniper says this makes it easier to correlate network and app events to speed up root cause analysis across network and dev teams. Just one note about this data center assurance. It also requires you to be using Juniper's Apstra intent-based networking data center platform, which is now called Data Center Director. You need Apstra to use this data center assurance cloud thing because it's the Apstra platform that's providing the network and system data for data center assurance AI to analyze. So a little bit complicated. If you're interested in data center assurance, you need to be on the Apstra platform. John, I don't know your take on Apstra. I feel like I kind of wonder. I always felt like intent and AI were sort of 2 separate tracks, and now it seems like Juniper is merging them with this integration.
I've always felt to the contrary that intent-based networking was sort of an early predecessor to what we call AI, because a lot of it really had to do with the ability to put in machine learning and machine intelligence more broadly into what you were trying to accomplish. So I almost feel like this is, I don't want to say a me too, but Juniper has always strategically been a fast runner-up with better architecture is kind of their claim to fame for almost everything they do, and I think this falls into that category.
I'm curious if, somewhere down, I guess the issue for me with Apstra is that it seems like best suited for greenfield environments because it's very picky about how you design and deploy your network. It's multi-vendor, but it's very picky about the design. Most data centers are not greenfield, so I'm wondering if there's a bifurcation coming in the Juniper portfolio where there's sort of the Apstra way and then the AI way. I don't know. This is just me speculating.
Yeah, that could be. And I mean, you do have an excellent point, which is, years ago when we did some research into the space, we discovered that there basically are 0 data centers that are single vendor. So there's that.
Right.
So, well, moving along with on the theme of data center storage and AI, Weka connects storage AI with new neural mesh architecture. Weka has introduced neural mesh, a major upgrade to its data platform, which is aimed at supporting high-performance AI workloads with a scalable, software-defined architecture built from containerized microservices. The architecture allows deployment across hybrid cloud environments and prioritizes data paths to GPUs to improve speed and efficiency. It was designed for customers like Nebius and Stability AI. Neural Mesh removes storage controllers and supports multiple protocols to enable what the vendor calls flexible large-scale AI training and inference. While its advanced features make it, quote, ideal for hyperscale environments, end quote, analysts also note that the platform targets a niche market focused on building and training large AI models. So my takeaway here is you're probably not going to buy this for the corporate data center anytime soon, but it's interesting to see the kinds of enhancements that are getting built in order to enable building and training large AI models.
Yeah, it feels like the AI market has opened up the opportunity for all kinds of interesting architectures and approaches and for different vendors to get into this space as opposed to, the traditional Ethernet and compute folks trying to sell you the same old stuff.
Exactly. And I think the other fun thing, and we'll talk about this a little later on in the show, the other fun thing is that AI has rejiggered yet again the decision as to whether to have a private data center or use the cloud, because all of a sudden you're going to be asking yourself, how much of your AI information do you want to be available in the cloud, even if it's, quote, protected? So it's always fun to see the data center world move from everybody's got a private data center to nobody's got a private data center to some people have a private data center. Interesting to watch.
The pendulum swings. Back to AI, and John, I feel like if we were playing an AI drinking game, our audience should not be operating heavy machinery at this point, or any machinery.
Yeah, and this would not be the time of week or day to be doing that. But you're
Anyway.
right. We would bingo. The AI bingo sheet is full up.
Is
Yes.
full. So network as a service vendor Nile has announced Nile Experience Intelligence, or NXI. This is a generative AI platform that Nile says can detect and fix campus network issues without human intervention. And I just want to provide a little background for context. Nile is a startup. It builds its own switches, its own APs, and its own edge devices, and its own software to run those devices. It does not operate in a multi-vendor environment. You need to be all in on Nile if you're going to be on their network. Once the Nile gear is installed, Nile essentially operates the network for customers. Customers get a dashboard where they can monitor performance and submit tickets, and customers also handle things like adding users and devices to the network and setting up access policies, but otherwise, Nile's running the show. With NXI, Nile says that if the AI doesn't have an automated fix for a problem, the GenAI will analyze the issue and generate a set of possible root causes and fixes. It submits this report in natural language to Nile engineers. The engineers can then examine the issue themselves, issue a fix, and provide feedback to that GenAI platform. And over time, once the engineers are confident in the fix and the AI's analysis, it can then be added to the AI's library of automated responses. I will note that this GenAI capability is not as yet being exposed to Nile customers. Its primary purpose is to support the production engineers operating customer networks from Nile. Nile and another company called Meter operate on a similar principle. I think these are interesting market entrants. They're essentially targeting orgs that need a campus network but don't want to operate a campus network. And I feel like that's probably a big market.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you can't talk about Nile without mentioning is that it was founded in 2018 by John Chambers of Cisco fame.
Yes.
So it's kind of an interesting, it's impossible to look at the company without thinking this is, John Chambers' attempt at next generation Cisco.
Absolutely.
So it's pretty clear who they're going after here. And the idea is they just want to leapfrog technologically. But it does, as you mentioned, we do want to see what Nile and Meter are up to because they're taking a very interesting approach that it's time for the next generation of campus networking.
Yeah. I'm curious if folks have had experience with Nile and any feedback. I'd love to hear about it. packetpushers.net/FU, because on the one hand, having built a podcasting network around network engineering, having it essentially like taken off your plate seems like, no, that's a terrible idea. But obviously there are folks out there who just need to run a business and don't want to have to worry about the network. So,
Yep. As my CEO once said to me when I was CTO of an engineering firm, Jonna, I don't care about the fleeping network. I care what it'll do for me. And he didn't say fleeping. So, yeah. Anyway, so continuing with the theme of AI, more AI and yet more AI, drink everybody. Korea says that next generation AI chips will draw 15,000 watts each, redefining power, cooling, and data center design. A new Korean Advanced Institute for Science and Technology, that is KAIST, roadmap warns that the next generation AI chips with HBM8 memory could consume over 15,000 watts per module by 2035, far exceeding today's power and cooling capabilities. The surge in energy demands will require major innovations in data center infrastructure. As we said, the pendulum shifts, and this will mean things like liquid cooling, new chip packaging, and upgraded power grids. Very important. The report also highlights that electricity costs are becoming a dominant factor in AI deployment decisions, with some regions already limiting new data center growth due to grid constraints. This is absolutely true. You've got people saying things like, I'm not putting data centers in Ireland because they're out of energy.
Right.
As AI accelerators drive up power density, energy availability, and efficiency will become critical to determining where and how AI infrastructure can scale. Fun fact, at the same time this is happening, the Chinese have recently announced that they now have a fusion reactor that has run for 30 minutes continuously, and they anticipate a commercial fusion reactor to be in production by, wait for it, 2035. So it's possible that the energy fix may actually be arriving right around the time we really need it.
Isn't fusion one of those things that's always a decade away and will always be a decade away?
Except for the fact that over the past 2 to 3 years, we've gone from a fraction of a second sustained fusion to a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes to now half an hour sustained, according to the Chinese, if you believe them. But you've also got the Germans breathing down their neck, who've announced, I want to say, something like 8 minutes sustained. So I think as with quantum computing, this is one of those things that has gotten overshadowed by the gee whiz factor of AI, but is actually more significant in the long run.
It's just kind of weird that we would need to get breakthroughs in fission just so we can have more like AI meme generators. It doesn't seem like this is what we're using the energy for.
Hey, come on, the internet and cat videos, what can I say?
Right. All right, speaking of AI chipsets, AMD has announced 2 new GPUs aimed at the AI and HPC markets. The MI350X and the MI355X offer 288 gigabytes of memory and up to 8 terabytes of memory bandwidth. AMD says the 350 series can support AI models of up to 520 billion parameters and are suitable for both AI model training and inferencing. The company is also touting rack scale options that bundle GPUs, CPUs, and AMD Pensando NICs into integrated systems that can support up to 128 GPUs, so there is your huge power draw. AMD says its Polera NIC is compliant with the Ultra Ethernet spec. The Ultra Ethernet Consortium just released the 1.0 version of its spec last week, which we covered. I will say I feel like AMD is definitely playing fast follow-up here to Nvidia. Nvidia is still huge, perhaps has an insurmountable lead with hardware and software. I will say, though, AMD seems to be executing better than other competitors, i.e. Intel, and the present appetite for AI infrastructure seems undiminished, so maybe AMD can step up and get into opportunities where NVIDIA can't meet demand or folks have gone with, AMD's software platform for doing their AI development.
Yeah, and honestly, no market is real unless there's more than one provider in it, so certainly there's plenty of room for AMD here, so good on them is what I would say.
I'll also note that at the HPE Discover pre-brief I attended, they were talking about their AI factories, which are essentially like pre-assembled, AI bundles, and they did mention that their AI factory line is supporting NVIDIA and AMD GPUs. So another data point that AMD has opportunities in this market.
Yes, it surely does. All right, moving right along, Cisco is capitalizing on its Isovalent purchase, which happened just a little while back. They have gone ahead and integrated the Isovalent eBPF-based networking and security technology into its core offerings, particularly launching the Isovalent load balancer to provide consistent cloud-native load balancing across data centers, public cloud, and of course, Kubernetes environments, which is where Isovalent has shined. The load balancer enables layer 3 to layer 7 traffic management, auto scaling, and self-healing capabilities, and simplifies operations by aligning with modern CI/CD workflows. Cisco plans to expand its reach to smart switches and sees it as a key component for customers migrating from platforms like VMware, which you gotta say is a pretty good time to be thinking about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Beyond load balancing, Isovalent's eBPF technology also powers things like real-time kernel patching, microsegmentation, and optimized data observability within Cisco's border security and analytics platforms, such as Hypershield and Splunk. So this is basically just another announcement of Cisco doing some anticipated but definitely welcome integration among many of its purchases.
Yeah, I think Isovalent was a smart grab for Cisco. I don't know if eBPF has taken off yet, maybe like they've hoped, but I do think there are opportunities for eBPF and Isovalent to have bigger applications, particularly in cloud and Kubernetes environments.
Yeah, and I do think that, migrating from platforms like VMware is actually a very good opportunity for Cisco, and I'd be surprised if they didn't capitalize on that pretty
Now is the
intensively.
time. Yeah.
Right.
The time. All right, some other news. Campus Ethernet switch sales worldwide grew 3% in Q1 of 2025, according to the Dell'Oro Group. Sales were up 12% in North America. Dell'Oro estimates that the uptake of Wi-Fi 7 APs will drive sales of campus Ethernet switching as customers adopt switches with higher bandwidth and PoE support. Dell'Oro says only a small amount of orders can actually be attributed to customers trying to get ahead of potential tariff changes by buying stuff before those tariffs take effect. So a lot of this purchase does seem to have been driven by Wi-Fi 7.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of the tariffs, and of course they would have, which is why we like them so much.
Right.
But yeah, that 3% doesn't seem huge. I'm wondering also why it's 4 times as much in North America. That also seems a little weird. I didn't think the North American economy was that much stronger.
They did say that there was a strange fall off in China specifically, and because I'm just reading the press release, I don't have access to the full report. I didn't get the full details, but
Right.
it was essentially for whatever reasons for this quarter, China sales dropped, which sort of, well, the overall number is still up. It wasn't as high as they anticipated, essentially because of China not buying as many switches as anticipated.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, China sneezes and the rest of the world gets a cold
These
just
days,
because
yeah.
of how large it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, moving on into the impact of AI. A Capgemini Research Institute survey of over 1,600 executives says that businesses are realizing significant cost savings from AI, particularly in customer operations, HR, and finance, by automating routine tasks. However, and this is the interesting part and the reason we decided to highlight this, despite open source models offering lower costs and strong performance, most executives prefer proprietary AI solutions for their security support and enterprise integration. The report highlights that current AI use is largely focused on early stage efficiencies rather than what they call deep transformational change. And as you mentioned earlier, Drew, executives see a lot of promise in generative AI and agentic AI, but scaling remains a challenge due to technical, security, and trust related concerns. So, nothing really super surprising here except for the issuing open source AI, which kind of makes sense and does align with what we're seeing from customers.
So I'm
Worth
curious,
noting here.
by proprietary AI solutions, if they mean from like their traditional IT vendors or they're going to an open AI or, an Anthropic or whatever?
I think the answer is yes, but I would also say, and I'm not speaking for Capgemini, and I'm not misrepresenting or representing what they're saying, but what we see in our customers is that, for example, Microsoft Copilot has a significant presence in most organizations because Microsoft basically exists as the enterprise technology vendor of choice. That's kind of the stance that they've taken. If it's anything outside of networking or a handful of very customized areas, Microsoft wants to play and they want to be your provider, and they rejigger their enterprise licensing to make sure it's very, very difficult to say no to that.
Yeah, I haven't dug into the survey, but I would be curious to know just how significant those cost savings are. And color me a little suspicious. Is this just sort of the herd by saying like, well, yeah, I have to say AI is having efficiencies because I promised my executives it would, so I better say it is? Or are we actually seeing demonstrable cost savings from AI being rolled out?
I would actually, and I'm an AI skeptic in some respects, but I would actually buy into this because it's automating routine tasks. And the point that I've been trying to make for a long time is quite a lot of knowledge workers do quite a lot of routine tasks that really do not require a $300,000 a year person, or even 150, or even a $50,000 a year person. There's a lot of code that's getting written that doesn't need to be written by a human. There's a lot of mediocre content that's being generated that doesn't have to be supreme superlative content. It just has to be generated. And there's just a lot of cases where, things like help desks are massively improved by AI because basically the big trouble with any kind of documentation is that if you're trying to figure out the answer to a question, you have to put your mind in this vendor or system provider's thinking to even know how to phrase the question. With AI, you don't have to do that. You ask, how do I do this thing? And bop, and maybe it's not right, but even 70, 80% right is good enough. That's better than having to, page through 600 pages of something to find out what your question even is, how to even express your question.
Yeah,
So
and
because
sorry, I think that's actually really relevant because a lot of call centers are essentially outsourced organizations where they might be serving hundreds of different customers. So you can't expect the call service agent that you're talking to be an expert in, vendor A because they have to deal with vendor A through Z. So if you can get an AI tool that can actually search all that, summarize it for you, and help you get to an answer faster, I guess I could see that being more efficient.
Well, and also another way to think about this is probably a decade and a half ago, crowdsourcing was one of the key digital transformation things because software companies, for example, were discovering that their users would actually deliver customer service better than paid contact centers because if you gamify the whole discussion of how do you help somebody, people are actually very willing to help. And if you think of AI as just being the next step. So you're automating the collection of the collective wisdom as opposed to requiring humans to input it manually. It makes logical sense because we've seen massive savings from things like, I remember one company was able to turn off a $2 million a year contact center because its crowdsourcing was doing the job.
Hmm.
And AI is just automating that crowdsourcing.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. Of course, I think you gave kind of an important caveat, though. It's probably going to be about 80% right. It's not going to be 100%, depending on where you're getting your data from. So,
Sure. And that's actually the case. I mean, I don't have solid data on contact on help desks, but in general, if you think about your experience with help desk, most of the time they get it right. Every now and then, they either have outdated documentation, or they don't understand your question, or there's some context that makes their answer wrong. So it's at least as good as you'd get from a human, is kind of the way I would put it.
I would love to see a really well done study that compares, the adoption of AI, particularly in customer operations or customer service, against like solid customer satisfaction metrics, and see how those numbers go up or down. Because if the AI is actually good at what it's doing, presumably customer satisfaction would go up. So, any data scientists out there who are looking for a project, maybe there's an idea. All right, moving on, but sticking with the impact of AI, Amazon CEO Andy Jassy wants Amazon employees to embrace AI tools. At the same time, Jassy says Amazon should be able to reduce its workforce thanks to AI-driven efficiencies. The BBC quotes Jassy as saying, "In the next few years, we expect that this will reduce our total corporate workforce as we get efficiency gains from using AI extensively across the company." I guess I feel two ways about this. Obviously, we want more efficient companies, but I also feel like tech executives have been sort of pussyfooting around the notion of AI is going to cause job losses, and finally here's somebody saying, "Yep, we're just not going to hire as many people, hopefully."
Well, yeah. On the one hand, that's true, but I think it's also the case that putting that out there, what's the wonderful comment that everybody's been making? It's like you will not necessarily lose your job to AI, but you might lose your job to an AI enabled employee.
Right.
In other words,
Right.
if you're not using AI in some capacity by now or in the near future, you're going to fall behind. So obviously, Amazon is going to embrace it. And I think there's a massive difference between we aren't going to need as many people in future and we will let natural attrition have its way, or, oh, by the way, we're going to be laying off a bunch of you lazy bums, which it doesn't seem like he's actually said. He said, in the next few years, we expect this will reduce our total corporate workforce. Well, if he does nothing and stops hiring, the total corporate workforce will reduce naturally.
Sure.
So he hasn't really clarified whether he's going to be laying people off, giving them packages, or what. That said, I'm sure at Amazon, even though they strive for ultimate efficiency, there's still a lot of inefficiencies of the form that we just talked about that, anyone at Amazon today can look around and say, gee, if my job is largely cutting and pasting content from A to B, I'm gone.
Sure.
Maybe I need another function. So
Yeah. I also sort of wondered, though, like he was also, I guess this was like a letter to employees encouraging folks to, get on board, adopt AI, use these tools, which on the one hand I understand, but on the other hand, it's also like, it feels like there's a sub message of, because if you don't, somebody else is, and they're going to take your job. And it just feels a little, I mean, I get this is capitalism, and so it's a little bit ugly and harsh, but I guess somebody's just being straightforward about it. I have to wonder, though, is it also like, is this a good recruiting posture? Like, welcome to Amazon, here's your badge, here's your login, here's a fleece, and now, take these AI tools and get to work on eliminating your job someday. Like,
well, honestly, it depends on who you are, because I read, I heard that sentence and I thought to myself, I would take that as a challenge. Let me see if I can eliminate my job, and in the process of eliminating my job, create a new one for myself, possibly the job eliminator for everybody else's jobs. It's kind of, I still remember someone of my acquaintance who was a very high-level executive at AT&T, and AT&T, like most telcos, had the policy of training its high-level executives to take over the union jobs so that they had a bargaining position. If the union said we were going to strike, basically they'd say, well, go ahead and strike. We have executives that would do your job. And this person just took one look at the job that he was asked to do and said, I'm going to write a script to automate that, get rid of that person, and sleep under my desk for as long as the strike lasts. And, if your job can be automated with a script or an AI, maybe find a different one. And I know that sounds horrible, but it's dock workers have known this for 70 years, right?
Sure. Yep. That's true.
And secretaries have known it. And it's not like we don't have executive assistants. It's just that the good executive assistants are the ones that can actually do things a whole lot more than just type.
Right. I think this is obviously perpetual in tech, that upskilling is a constant, and obsolescence is always over the horizon. So, but it's I think now also laid bare, Silicon Valley is essentially looking to eliminate you down the line. So react accordingly, respond accordingly, and maybe adjust your mindset. I guess I got to be more like you, Jonna. Can I automate myself out of a job?
Exactly. Although I will say also, one of my colleagues did in fact do exactly that. He was hired, very junior guy at the time. He was hired. He took one look at what he was doing in sales ops, automated the whole thing, spent the summer automating it. At the end of the summer, they were like, "Great, you did a great job. Goodbye." So, but he's been highly successful. So
I guess. So yeah, it depends on what happens next and how you can leverage what you learned. So that does wrap up the news. Jonna, where can folks get more from you?
you can always find me on LinkedIn, and I know several of you have come and found me there. Also, happy to see you at my company, nemertes.com, nemertes.com. Just fill out the contact form, and we'll be in touch.
I'm Drew Conry Murray. I'm on Blue Sky at DrewCM. I'm also blogging at packetpushers.net. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Stick around for our sponsored Tech Bites episode with HPE. We'll have more details about what's on tap at HPE Discover. That's coming right up. Today on the Tech Bites podcast, we get a preview of HPE Discover. HPE is our sponsor, and we're going to talk about significant networking, security, and agentic AI announcements coming out of the event. We'll also talk about how HPE is converging network and security in its product portfolio, cloud-delivered network management, and HPE's approach to AI, both as a tool being used within HPE and to deliver new services and capabilities to customers. Our guests are John Green, CTO and Chief Security Officer for the Aruba Networking Division of HPE, and Larry Lunetta, VP AI, Security and Networking Product Marketing. John and Larry, welcome to the podcast. And Larry, what can network and wireless engineers expect to hear at HPE Discover about new products, new capabilities, that kind of thing?
As you know, HPE Discover is our marquee customer and partner event that we hold each year in Las Vegas during the month of June. There's about 12,000 people that come and experience the entire HPE portfolio, but networking is one of the three core focus points for Discover. And that reflects HPE's strategic priorities that include not just networking, but hybrid cloud and AI. And attendees will see a dedicated networking demo showcase covering the entire portfolio, and they'll attend over 140 technical networking sessions. And our engineering team's innovation has been in overdrive over the last 6 months or so. And while we'll definitely have some exciting AI news that we'll talk about at the show, we've also made 3 major announcements over the last 2 months covering every part of the portfolio. We call that the road to Discover.
Okay.
So in early April, we introduced on-premise and VPC deployment models for Aruba Central, which is our cloud-native network management platform. And we also introduced some bespoke AI agents that kind of are the forerunners of the agentic AI announcement that we'll be making at the show that John will go into in more detail. At RSA at the end of April, we introduced the migration of ClearPass NAC capability to Central. We now have cloud native NAC, and I think everyone's familiar with ClearPass and the access control solution that represents. And that's in support of a universal ZTNA solution. That's part of the security and networking coming together. And then at the end of May, we introduced broad-based additions to our core portfolio, including 7 new Wi-Fi 7 access points, and updates to our campus and data center switching portfolio. And that also includes new DPU-based smart switches. And then finally, as I mentioned, during the show, we're unveiling a complete agentic AI ops solution that builds on our leadership in applying AI to manage today's complex networks. So overall, super excited, lots going on. Everyone who attends is going to see all these innovations, and it's probably our most impactful Discover ever.
Yeah, you said I think 140 networking related sessions. That's pretty good. And maybe folks who weren't thinking of HPE, you said networking is now like one of the core pillars of the show.
Exactly. The showcase is diced up into 3 areas, as I mentioned, and there's over 25 exhibits, including how we manage the entire show's NOC, which will be on the showcase floor. So it's going to be fun for networking professionals.
Yeah, I'd love to stop by the NOC and see everything that's going on there. So, networking and security, they're often like kind of separate silos in organizations. Is HPE seeing that changing? And if so, what does it mean for how HPE is integrating security and networking in its portfolio?
I think the answer is that they have to be more integrated these days. The stakes have become too high in both cybersecurity world, but also in networking in terms of the dependence that our customers have on their networking environments. People, in 20 years ago, you could get things like maintenance windows for your network, and today those are really difficult to get. People expect these things to be up 24 hours a day. And so security and networking have been coming more and more together. And just to illustrate the example, we've seen customer situations where hey, the Wi-Fi is down, and people immediately, the networking team goes and tries to figure out, well, what failed on that? Was it a firmware problem? Was it a config problem, et cetera? Only to find out that the security team had changed some internal firewall rule and not told anybody, and suddenly the access points can't reach their controller anymore, and that was the ultimate problem. And it was because the security teams and the networking teams were operating from a different operating picture. They didn't have that same type of network management view, et cetera. So that's a real easy example of a place where those things have to come more together. The other thing that I would say in there is we've seen if you've been in networking as long as I have, you remember when we had kind of discrete boxes called routers back in the day, and there were lots of them. They were all over the place. And gradually those devices kind of disappeared. Now, not everywhere, but in sort of the corporate interior network, they became subsumed into the switch. And initially we called it a layer 3 switch. I don't think we really say that anymore, but we kind of see the same thing happening with the interior firewall, the departmental firewall or the zone firewall. Of why should that be a separate box managed by a separate team? Why don't we just integrate the firewall functionality into those switching and routing devices and make that an innate part of the network? And that really gets to the idea of zero trust and where those things need to go, of saying, I've got to control access down to the individual port level or the individual Wi-Fi connection level. Bringing security and networking together really helps you do that.
There used to be an architectural answer to that question, John. Why don't we do that? But now it's just a different world now. It really is. AI question though. There is so much hype around AI. Larry, you mentioned there's going to be some AI discussion like that. That's going to be one of the important discussions at Discover. Okay, a lot of business leaders, I look at them and they're all wound up about this. Should I go this direction? Everybody else seems to be doing it, so should I be doing it? Okay, how are you guys as HPE guiding your customers about this? How do you guide them so that do they need to adopt AI? And if they do so, how do they do it correctly?
Yeah, I'm a fan of the Gartner hype cycle that they talk about, and we're clearly at sort of the peak of inflated expectations when it comes to AI right now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there's a plateau of enlightenment coming down the road where we sort of realize what AI is really good for. Look, what I see today, and we saw this in the security industry maybe 5 years ago, and it's kind of caught up to the rest of everything today, is vendors that say, well, today I have this feature that now it's AI powered, and it's the same feature that they had a year before, but now it's AI powered. And so as a consumer of that, you really need to ask the question, what problem is the AI solving? What is it enabling me to do that I couldn't do without having AI? And to sort of sort through the vendor speak on these sorts of things, because everybody's hyped up over this, and it is an exciting technology. We're big believers in it. We're just not believers in saying AI for the sake of AI. We're trying to solve real customer problems with that. And so an example of that, a big example of that, is in the area of AI ops that we use to support network operations. AI is really good at picking up small signals out of big noisy messes, and humans are not good at that. And that's an area where we've deployed AI very effectively to pull out insights. And an example of that, I've got 6 different Wi-Fi customers. They all have similar looking networks in terms of, from an AI perspective, we don't know, that they're all hospitals or that they're all retail stores, that sort of thing. But from a feature perspective that the AI can pick up on, they all look to be the same. And some of those have higher performance and higher, however you want to define performance, looks better. And they have slightly different configs. The AI is good at saying, hey, your config looks slightly different from the best performer in this category. We think if you change this one setting, you could increase performance as well. And by the way, it's safe to do that because we've also analyzed your user base, and we know that you don't have sort of problematic client devices that are in this environment that would conflict with that particular config setting. That's something that AI is really good at picking through. And so we can answer this question kind of all day long of what's the business benefit to the AI. The generative AI that's sort of just come on the scene. It feels like yesterday. It was more than 2 years ago at this point. That's a whole other use case where, and the easiest way to look at that is a natural language interface to a very large data set, and being able to allow people and our customers, for example, to ask more open-ended queries. The data's been there for a long time, right? We've always had the data, and we've been building up the data lakes for that. But customers are not data scientists, and they don't know the query language to sort of build arbitrary queries into that data, where something like an LLM lets them describe in natural language that they all do speak. Hey, this is what I want to get, and let the AI figure out what the programming and the query language needs to look like. So that's another really good use case for AI as well. So I would say, yeah, there's a lot of hype around this. I don't think people need to panic. I think they need to ask their vendors and say, tell me what you're doing with AI to make my life better, and it'll be a good conversation.
But it seems like you've kind of elucidated on you've made it, I think, an important distinction between sort of approaches to AI. One, like right now, everything seems to be wrapped up around LLMs, but you're also talking about having a data lake, having a lot of data that an AI can analyze and find things that maybe people weren't necessarily looking for, and then surface up those recommendations. And on the other hand, you've got sort of the LLM model where I can talk to a data set essentially using natural language.
Yeah, and one of those is more classically called machine learning. It's a
Yeah.
subfield of AI, but it's sort of saying we don't exactly know what the question is that we ought to ask. Let's let the data tell us what questions we ought to be asking, and that's what machine learning is really good at. So we end up with an algorithm that, well, it's not really an algorithm, but it is of how do I determine whether performance will be good or bad? And the machine learning has been trained on all this massive data. And that's kind of a key point is if you don't have that data lake, it's really, you can't do the machine learning. You can't do that sort of training. The generative is really just about, again, large language models and being able to converse in natural language, but also to create new things. So you can think about, if I want to extract something of value from that data lake, I need some programming to be able to do that. And LLMs are actually good at writing code, and they can be good at testing code and making sure that those things work.
When I asked you the initial question about AI, John, and you led with AI ops, I was like, oh, here we go, agentic AI. And then you didn't say agentic AI at all. So, but that is a big news story right now, agentic AI, and where that is taking us, particularly as it applies to AI ops. Does HPE have a story there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be a big topic at Discover is showing that agentic AI capability and combining that with AI apps. Agentic is really about take an LLM, take a ChatGPT or take your pick of LLM. It's sitting there kind of happily waiting for you to instruct it to do something or to ask it a question. And then it does the thing that you asked for, produces a picture, writes a poem, answers a question of some form. Agentic is more like take ChatGPT and turn it into a running process and give it sort of standing orders and say, keep doing this thing over and over again. And then give it some ability to actually fulfill externally, an action that you want it to take. And so an example of that would be in a network environment. Hey, I've got a building, I've got the dining hall and classroom building one. There's a link between those two buildings, and every day it seems to suffer from fluctuations in performance. Agentic AI, go figure out what's happening. And that that agent basically says, okay, I've been instructed to go find the network problem. How would I go about doing that? And it has access to documentation. It has access to best practices and config. And it's got maybe 75 sub agents that are all experts in a particular area, like link stats or routing protocols, or take your pick. And they can communicate to each other. That's really what the agentic is about. And so the being able to say, go do that, come back to me when you have an answer. And if you see these certain sorts of things, you have access to change config, or you have access to take other types of actions. That's really what agentic is all about. It's a little bit more autonomy to go and be doing something and not sitting around kind of waiting for a human to give instructions.
Is the trust level there for that, John? Are we at that point where we're ready to give some autonomy over to AI agents?
Yeah, that's a good question that we talk about internally quite a bit. I think the answer is yes for some things. I think it's going to take some time for people to build up that trust. And the first time the AI takes down your network, trust is lost. And so we need to be really careful as a networking vendor on not letting those sorts of things happen. So I think it's going to be a slow. I say slow, but it's going to be relative in terms of building up that trust. Basically, you can look at it from a human in the loop perspective right now and saying, and we've done this, right, with some of the AI ops and AI insights that we'll produce. We'll say, we think that if you did this one thing, it would improve experience by 7%. Do you want to do the thing? Click this button. And if the administrator clicks the button and the response is kind of what we said we thought it would be and nothing goes wrong, that's over time you build up that level of trust. And so I think you're able to basically say, here's the realm of things that I'm willing to allow the AI to do autonomously, and here's the sorts of things that I'm not willing to let it do, and to kind of ring fence what the agents are able to do. They can still make recommendations back to you, but yeah, you're getting from a co-pilot to an autopilot, I guess, is the question. I think it just takes time, and I think it takes experience of being built up, both for us to not do bad things, and also for our customers to kind of see that bad things aren't happening.
I'm actually hopeful that agentic AI will be something we can trust sooner rather than later, and that building our own code to automate something means that we as the humans had to build in all the corner cases and the exceptions and the logic to make sure it doesn't mess up. And that agentic, with the ability to learn from documentation and so on, might have all that logic learned automatically, as long as the documentation is all there. And it would rely less on humans writing code to make sure that the script that's got to run autonomously can do so successfully at all times.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm putting my security hat on. We've seen a lot of people doing this sort of vibe coding thing with AI, and unfortunately, sometimes it produces things that are riddled with security vulnerabilities because it's copying, bad code that's been seen out there before. But I keep having to remind myself, this is the worst that it's ever going to be. It's only going to get better from here.
So one last question before we wrap up. Obviously, Aruba networking is a big part of HPE. Anything around Wi-Fi 7 or even AI related to wireless that we should be looking for at the show? Yes,
and in fact, we were just talking about what we would call AI for networking. That was a point that John made. If you turned around and you say networking for AI, the network has a critical role in terms of capturing, securing, and transporting data, especially for training and for inferencing. And we've continued to tune our infrastructure to support that. Our switches, especially our higher end DPU enhanced switches, provide built-in networking services that you don't have to offload to the servers now. At the edge, our Wi-Fi 7 access points have been designed to capture not just user-oriented data, but IoT-oriented data, lots of different connection capabilities. We can run containers on the access points, which means that we can do some pre-processing of data before we send it on to the AI models. So, we play both sides. We play, how do we make networks easier to manage via AI for networking? And then the flip side is we enhance the ability for organizations to build and stand up AI models through networking for AI.
Yeah, I'd add to just say that from a Wi-Fi 7 perspective, we continue to build out that portfolio, both indoor, outdoor, and semi-indoor, outdoor, and think of a stadium that we're doing a lot of large public venues where the roof of that stadium opens up. Is that an indoor and outdoor environment? And that becomes really important when you start getting into things like 6 gigahertz. And we've done a lot of work worldwide trying to open up that 6 gigahertz band for unlicensed use because there's so much spectrum that people are exhausting, the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz. So we're moving into 6 gigahertz as well. And that's a big deal for Wi-Fi 7. The other thing I'd add is those access points, memory constrained and CPU constrained type devices. What kind of AI models can we run on those? And we're starting to look at some of that as well to figure out, hey, is there a model that I can run data through at the edge so I don't have to send everything all back to the cloud? Instead, I can do some local processing and kind of send out inferences only. So exciting things happening on that front too.
All right, well, HPE Discover, the first day of it is going to be coming out the same day as this podcast. So if folks want to go find out, news releases or see keynotes or talks, where should they go?
HPE.com. There's a URL for that you'll publish that users can go directly to Discover, the Discover site. Tune in to the keynotes and things like that. One of which is going to be at the Sphere. So there's a lot of excitement around that.
All right, that's HPE.com, and you can also just search HPE Discover to get all of that information. And we will have links in the show notes that accompany this podcast if you want to learn more about HPE, more about the Airheads community from Aruba Networks and the Discover event. Larry and John, thank you for joining us, and thanks to HPE for being a sponsor. Sponsors ensure that the Packet Pushers can continue to offer high-quality, deeply technical content for your professional development for free. That includes a dozen technical podcasts on networking, security, IPv6, DevOps, and more, plus an industry blog, 2 weekly newsletters, a community Slack group, a YouTube channel, and an IRC group. Find everything at packetpushers.net. It's all free with no login required. You can also hear us on Spotify, thought lead with us on LinkedIn, and rate us on Apple Podcasts. Last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.